Good morning. I'm Pete Baklinski, Communications Director with Campaign Life Coalition. I'm here to tell you about what's going to be happening on Parliament Hill tomorrow at noon. Thousands of Canadians will gather to defend human life. And why are they there? Because abortion has been happening in our country since 1969. What we refer to as Canada's Day of Infamy was a day when a law was passed that allowed a mother to kill the preborn child in her womb. We are now at 57 years of abortion. The death toll is approaching 5 million. That's 5 million human lives who have been snuffed out by this tragedy. In our charter, Canada and the rest of the civilized world recognizes that everyone has the right to life, a right that is fundamental, inherent, and inalienable. Yet abortion denies this right to the smallest and most vulnerable members of the human family, the preborn. Abortion makes a mockery of our charter's promise. It says that not everyone has the right to life. It excludes the preborn from the protection of law. That is why abortion is the greatest human rights violation of our time. It is the greatest injustice. It is evil, and it must be abolished. The theme for this year's National March for Life is "Follow Me." These are the words that Jesus spoke in the Gospel of Matthew. Jesus teaches us that getting into heaven is connected to how we treat the most vulnerable among us. Jesus loved children. He said, "Let the little children come to me. Whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." St. Mother Teresa once came to Parliament Hill in 1988 at the National Rally for Life, and she had a message that is as relevant today as it was when she spoke back then. She said about these words of Christ, "That is why abortion is such a terrible evil, because in refusing the little child, we are refusing Christ himself." She added, "Protect the little unborn child for the glory of God and the good of this country." This year is the 29th National March for Life. The event was first organized in 1998 to take place just outside here on the grounds where our laws are made. And we gather tomorrow to call on the government to enact legal protection for all human beings, from conception to natural death. The pro-life movement in Canada remains strong, peaceful, and determined. We will continue to come to Parliament Hill as long as it takes until our elected leaders hear the cry of the preborn child and protect every single life, including the preborn, in law. In today's press conference, you'll hear from members of our team, Campaign Life Coalition. You'll hear about the connection between abortion and euthanasia. You'll hear about Alberta's emerging leadership in protecting vulnerable people from euthanasia. You'll hear about Quebec's status as the world's leading jurisdiction for euthanasia. Finally, you'll hear about which vulnerable groups may be targeted next for this practice. And finally, we'll hear from Aleš Primc, president of the Movement for Children, who is here all the way from Slovenia with a special message for the Canadian people. I will now invite Josie Luetke, our Director of Education and Advocacy, who will explain the link between abortion and euthanasia.
Thanks, Pete. Tomorrow will mark 57 years since the Day of Infamy, when Omnibus Bill C-150 passed and the floodgates were opened to abortion and more broadly to the killing of the innocent, to killing as a solution to suffering. Since 1969, almost 5 million human beings have been killed in the womb, which is like wiping out the entire province of Alberta. That is how badly scarred we are as a nation. Abortion was sold to the Canadian public as only being for exceptional circumstances when the life or health of a mother was endangered. But with time, health became more and more broadly interpreted to the point where therapeutic abortion committees were just rubber stamping requests, and the Supreme Court struck the entire law down. The preborn have been without any protection since, meaning a woman can have an abortion at any point in pregnancy for any reason or no reason whatsoever. Nowadays, 100,000 preborn human beings are killed every year in Canada, which poetically is approximately how many human beings have been killed since euthanasia was legalized in 2016. Euthanasia was sold to the Canadian public under the auspices that would also be reserved only for exceptional cases when a terminally ill patient is suffering intolerably. And now we see, a decade later, that it's been extended to anyone with a quote-unquote grievous and irremediable medical condition, and it may very well be expanded further. What I need to underscore is that we predicted this all. The earliest leaders of the pro-life movement warned that we were on a slippery slope. For instance, in 1967, during a hearing of the Standing Committee on Health and Welfare, Philip Cooper of the Emergency Organization for the Defense of the Unborn testified that legalizing abortion in limited circumstances risked, quote, devaluing human life more broadly, unquote. He not only predicted that abortion would become available for reasons of eugenics and convenience, but that it could also usher in euthanasia. And when he was challenged by NDP MP Stanley Knowles, he replied, quote, when we blaze a trail, we do not know how far other people are going along that trail, unquote. Once we accept that killing before birth is permissible, we will inevitably accept that killing after birth is permissible too. Why? Because birth is only a change in location. The birth canal cannot magically change a non-person into a person. If you undermine human dignity at the beginning of life, you undermine human dignity at the end of life and for everyone in between. Our right to life is no longer perceived as inherent and inviolable, but as something earned that can be easily waived. Correspondingly, we grow desensitized to the horror of killing. The moral prohibition against killing the innocent, a necessary guardrail for any culture wishing to call itself civilized, is compromised. It should be ironclad, for otherwise we will rapidly devolve into a society dominated by survival of the fittest, which is no society at all. It is interesting to note that Dr. Ellen Wiebe, before she became one of the most prolific doctors, killing hundreds of patients, including Keanu Vafayan, the 26-year-old who was depressed because his diabetes took his sight in one eye. She, Dr. Ellen Wiebe, was first an abortionist. Prophetic pro-life voices foresaw that if we adopted killing as an expedient solution to the suffering a pregnant mom might experience, it will only be a matter of time before we accept killing as an expedient solution to other types of suffering as well. Compared to developing adequate social supports and to fulfilling our responsibilities as family and community members to aid the vulnerable, killing is just so much cheaper and easier. There are hopeful indications that euthanasia supporters are waking up to its harms, and we may yet stop its expansion. For decades, our warning was not heeded, but heed it now. If we truly want to see Canada flourish, if we want to see a return to justice, righteousness, and blessing upon our nation, we must reject the killing of the innocent altogether. To quote Malcolm Muggeridge, quote, either life is always and in all circumstances sacred or intrinsically of no account. It is inconceivable that it should be in some cases the one and in some the other, unquote. Thank you. And I would now like to invite Jack Fonseca, the Director of Political Operations for Campaign Life Coalition, up to the mic to talk about recent political developments on this issue.
Thank you. 10 years and 100,000 killings. Since the legalization of euthanasia in 2016, the reassurance given us by the lawmakers of the day, who explained it would be just a rare option for terminally ill patients, has vanished like a morning mist. That reassurance was immediately replaced with a yawning chasm into which tens of thousands of vulnerable Canadians have fallen headlong. Lonely people who are sick but not dying are being poisoned to death. Disabled persons made to feel worthless by society are receiving lethal injections. Federal bureaucrats now advise veterans seeking treatment for PTSD and a wheelchair lift to consider assisted suicide instead. People have been approved for euthanasia because they can't afford rent, because of chemical sensitivities, diabetes, partial blindness, hearing loss, and even for being homeless. Now, a maid is someone who sweeps up a dirty home. And it's an appropriate moniker in this discussion because the Liberal government and our utilitarian healthcare system is using the MAID program to take out what they consider the human trash. The poor, the lonely, the sick. You get the picture. The next euthanasia time bomb is set to explode on March 17, 2027, when eligibility will automatically expand to mentally ill patients, the depressed, autism sufferers, those with anxiety, eating disorders, and so many other psychological issues. For all these reasons, we urge members of Parliament from all parties to vote yes to Bill C-218 by Conservative MP Tamara Jansen. If passed, this law would exclude all mental disorders from eligibility for euthanasia. Bill C-218 would ensure Canada continues to prioritize suicide prevention instead of suicide provision. Again, we demand that every MP, Liberal, NDP, Conservative, Bloc, and Green votes yes to Bill C-218 when third reading occurs. Alberta is already leading the way to fight against this and legislatively with the passage of Provincial Bill 18, which totally eliminates euthanasia for people who are not dying and bans its provision to the mentally ill. Alberta will also prohibit healthcare workers from initiating conversations about euthanasia with patients and safeguard the conscience rights of healthcare workers, hospitals, and palliative care institutions who do not want to participate in killing their patients for ethical or religious reasons. Premier Danielle Smith has shown all the provinces the way. Now they all need to introduce similar legislation as a first step. And what's the next step? After that is for all provinces to reject euthanasia entirely by using their constitutional power to regulate, license, and determine what procedures count as genuine health care. This power includes defunding those procedures which are not medically necessary. MAID, as they call it, that euphemism, doesn't treat an underlying illness or injury, so it is not health care. All it does is remove the patient from this world, which is a sort of lifestyle choice, like cosmetic surgery. And therefore, provinces neither have to fund it nor provide it. So if you want a doctor-assisted suicide, you'll have to pay for it yourself. And in this way, the provincial government wouldn't be making the act illegal, but these acts of murder would dry up. Taxpayers just wouldn't fund it, and consequently, the promise of it being rare would finally materialize. Let's make it happen, Canada. Thank you. And I will now call up Brandan Tran, the Director of Public Affairs and Outreach, who will speak about where euthanasia in Canada is quickly heading.
My name is Brandan Tran. I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Outreach for Campaign Life Coalition. Canada's euthanasia program, Medical Assistance in Dying, MAID, began in 2016 as a narrowly defined provision for the terminally ill. Now, 10 years later, in 2026, over 100,000 Canadians have died by MAID euthanasia. MAID is now the fifth leading cause of death in Canada. Each expansion was described as a final, carefully considered step. However, this euthanasia regime keeps creeping forward. I want to draw attention to three concerns about the widening scope of euthanasia in Canada. These are not concerns from the fringes, but statements from a member of a provincial medical college, recommendations before Parliament, and the reality of MAID right now in Canada. And most Canadians are not yet aware of the extent of the horror. The first concern is about a statement regarding infants. A member of the Quebec College of Physicians has formally stated that MAID may be an appropriate treatment for babies from birth to 1 year of age, who come into the world with severe deformities and very serious syndromes, and that parents should have the opportunity to obtain this care for their infant. Canadian law currently permits the withdrawal of life-sustaining treatment for critically ill newborns. This medical practitioner's proposal goes further. He calls for the calculated killing of an infant. These are patients, babies, who cannot speak, cannot consent, and cannot ask for help. If we cannot draw the line here, I'm not sure where medical professionals imagine the line to be. The second concern is a proposal regarding mature minors. A report by the Special Joint Committee on Medical Assistance in Dying, AMAD, has recommended extending MAID to children with parental consent described as optional. A physician, not a child's parent, would determine whether a child is able to consent to his own death. In this discussion, MAID advocates showed their true colors and defended the rationale for euthanizing minors without consulting their parents. Yet 43 expert witnesses called this recommendation deeply flawed. I might call it something stronger. The third concern is euthanasia on demand. Ontario's chief coroner has documented MAID deaths driven not by illness, but by poverty, loneliness, and lack of housing. Approximately half of those who died by MAID in 2024 reported requesting it because they felt like a burden to their families, friends, or caregivers. These are not necessarily people dying of terminal illness. These are Canadians failed by a system that chose to offer them lethal injection rather than the support and hope they needed to live. The future we fear is already here. Death is, right now, available as a solution to social suffering, and it has not remained a last resort. Euthanasia, for those who feel they are a burden, has become the path of least resistance. And, as just mentioned, half of MAID recipients ask to be killed because they believe they are a burden. Once death is established as a right, poverty, loneliness, lack of housing, disability, and suffering become symptoms to be treated by lethal injection rather than met with care, compassion, and help. A Leger poll found that most Canadians, 58%, do not support expanding MAID eligibility to those whose sole medical condition is a mental illness or mental disorder. An Angus Reid survey found that 72% of Canadians polled do not support the March 2027 scheduled expansion. The public is ahead of Parliament on this. It is time Parliament caught up. Thank you for your time. I now call on George Buscemi, President of Campagne Québec-Vie, who will speak about euthanasia in Quebec.
I'll give my English summary of the remarks after this French intervention. Mesdames, Messieurs, bonjour. Je m'appelle George Buscemi. Je suis président de Campagne Québec-Vie. En 2025, le Québec est devenu officiellement le champion mondial de l'euthanasie. 6 268 Québécois et Québécoises sont morts par aide médicale à mourir l'an dernier. 7,9% de tous nos décès. 36% des morts par l'aide médicale à mourir au Canada surviennent chez nous, au Québec, alors que nous ne représentons que 22% de la population canadienne. Et en mars 2027, on étendra cette aide aux personnes souffrant uniquement de maladies mentales. Comment en sommes-nous arrivés là? Je tiens d'abord à rappeler deux voix québécoises qui ne sont pas les miennes. Denise Bombardier, peu avant sa mort, s'étonnait que le seul consensus politique au Québec se forme autour d'une loi sur la mort. Et elle posait la question, franchement, le poids d'une culture de mort pèse-t-il sur nous? Patrick Lagacé, dans la presse en avril dernier, écrivait noir sur blanc que le Québec est champion du monde de l'aide médicale à mourir. Et il appelait cela un angle mort qu'il faut regarder en face. Pourquoi nous, au Québec, et pas les autres? En 2010, j'ai déposé devant la commission spéciale sur la question de mourir dans la dignité un mémoire intitulé « Une fausse liberté, les 50 ans d'euthanasie au Québec ». J'y prédisais un scénario, désespoir institutionnalisé, cercle vicieux, une société qui finirait par éliminer la pauvreté en éliminant les pauvres, la maladie en éliminant les malades. On m'a traité d'alarmiste. 15 ans plus tard, je vous laisse juger. Mais la vraie question est plus profonde. L'être humain a deux dimensions. Une dimension horizontale, le corps, la matière, le plaisir et une dimension verticale, l'âme, le sens, la transcendance, Dieu. Couper la verticale, il ne reste que l'horizontale. Et quand il ne reste que la matière, la vie devient un simple calcul de plaisir et de douleur. La douleur devient un mal absolu. Et quand la douleur est le mal absolu, la mort devient un soin. La mort de soi d'abord, puis par contagion, la mort des autres. Voilà en mots simples ce qui se passe au Québec depuis la Révolution tranquille. Nous nous sommes amputés la verticale. Il nous reste un hédonisme plat et triste qui fuit la souffrance jusqu'à fuir dans la mort. Mesdames et messieurs, le Québec est un champion du monde de l'euthanasie parce qu'il est en train de devenir champion du monde du bannissement de Dieu. On le voit maintenant avec la nouvelle loi PL9 au Québec qui a banni la prière en public. Nous nous coupons de la transcendance. Il ne nous reste que l'hédonisme plat, une vie terne, sans but, sans sens. Et c'est pour cela que le suicide devient de plus en plus la solution. Tant que cette logique n'est pas éliminée, les chiffres continueront de monter. Je vous remercie. Quick English summary. My name is George Buscemi. I'm president of Campagne Québec-Vie, also known as Quebec Life Coalition. In 2025, Quebec officially became the world champion, not of hockey, but of euthanasia. 6,268 Quebecers died by medical assistance in dying last year, almost 8% of all our deaths. 36% of all made deaths in Canada take place in our province, even though we make up hardly 1/5 of the Canadian population. And in March 2027, this assistance will be extended to people suffering solely from mental illness. How did we get here? The reason involves how humans are made. The human being has two dimensions, a horizontal one, body, matter, pleasure, and a vertical one, soul, meaning, transcendence, God. Cut the vertical and only the horizontal is left. And when only matter is left, life becomes a simple calculus of pleasure and pain. Pain becomes absolute evil, and when pain is absolute evil, death becomes a form of care, the death of oneself, and then by contagion, the death of others. That, in plain words, is what is happening in Quebec since the Quiet Revolution. We have amputated our verticality. What's left is a sad, flat hedonism, one that flees suffering all the way to fleeing into death itself. Ladies and gentlemen, Quebec is the world champion of euthanasia because it is becoming the world's champion at banishing God. Until this changes, the numbers will keep climbing. Thank you. I now invite Aleš Primc to give his remarks. Aleš is the president of the Movement for Children and Families and has recently led a successful, highly successful, anti-euthanasia referendum campaign in Slovenia that is being hailed around the world as a historic victory. Aleš will be speaking on Parliament Hill tomorrow at the National March for Life and will be our keynote speaker at the Rose Dinner tomorrow evening at the Ottawa Conference Centre. Aleš.
We'll have to speed things up a little bit to allow for questions.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm glad to be here in beautiful Canada, and I thank my pro-life friends for kind invitation. I'm bringing really great news from Slovenia, Europe. In November 2025, we won referendum preventing poisoning sick and elderly people from death. And I think it's very, very important because we won against this anti-culture of death. And this victory is significant also for Canada because you know that it is possible. We can win and we will win because we are winning because of concrete human beings. We don't fight this fight for symbolic, for ideology. We fight this fight for concrete human beings, for concrete elderly and sick people who don't need poison. They need compassion, they need help, they need our relationship, they need us. And it is not right. It is not right that we, as society, give them the solution of poison. Poison is not a solution. Poison is defeat of solidarity, compassion, and love. And I'm sure that this world will survive because of solidarity, because of compassion, and because of love. And that's why I'm very, very sure that also Canada is going to be free poison state very soon, because of my great friends here in Canada. And I would like also to invite everybody to come tomorrow to March for Life. March for Life is the most beautiful march and most beautiful event every year in every city. So I invite you to come to march for the most beautiful thing in the world. This is for love, solidarity, and life. Thank you very much.
So, for Jack, actually, your colleague in Slovenia, Aleš, I think it was 53% that you won the referendum by. 53% of voters participated in the referendum. Do you think you have that demographic in Canada?
You know, of course, with polls, it always depends how you phrase the question. You know, if we ask the question, do you want to end the poisoning of Canadians to death, we'll probably get higher numbers. If you use the sanitized euphemism that the Liberal government has invented of medical assistance in dying, you get lower. But, you know, that's a battle we have to fight. I'm not sure where we stand in terms of that, but that is the goal. We're gonna make this form of homicide illegal again.
One of your organization's more preferred candidates based on their voting record and their record on stances, including euthanasia, including conversion therapy and other social issues. Marilyn Gladu crossed the floor, as you know. Do you believe that you've lost an ally in that sense? And where do you think the stance is within the Conservative Party today? I know you haven't necessarily endorsed Pierre Poilievre, the leader of the Conservative Party's voting record, but given that there are questions about leadership and now there's a bit more opening for that discussion, what are your views on the Conservative Party as your main alternative?
Yeah. You know, first of all, to address Marilyn Gladu, you know, it was disappointing. She spoke at the National March for Life. I forget which year it was. One of my colleagues, 2017. So she spoke on the steps of Parliament with us in solidarity to demand legal protection for children in the womb. And now, for whatever political power play, she crossed the floor to become a pro-death liberal. So, of course, that's disappointing. With respect to the Conservative Party, in spite of the leadership, yes, Pierre Poilievre is pro-abortion. He's not on side, but there are a great number of pro-life members of Parliament within the Conservative caucus, and we want to grow those numbers. And it's through nominating and electing pro-life MPs that will have a majority to one day pass a bill. And we're not going to give up. You know, we're in this for life. We're committed to victory for God and for His children here on earth who are being killed and poisoned and butchered by abortion.
This year's march happens while the Joint Committee is working on MAID. What is your appreciation of the work right now by the committee? What are you telling them, and what message does this year's march want to send the members of that Joint Committee on the Hill?
Yeah, you're referring to the Senate committee?
The Senate and House, it's a joint committee.
Yeah. With respect to euthanasia?
Or MAID, yeah, medical assisted.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously, you know, the big thing is the time bomb is about to explode with the expansion of euthanasia to depressed persons, those with eating disorders, you know, those with autism, those with any kind of mental illness at all whatsoever. And so, you know, that's what's pressing right now. So we want the committee to consider how far it's gone in such short years where people are being killed for absolutely no good reason. There's never any reason to kill yourself or to have a doctor murder you, but you know it's going to get a lot worse. People who do not have capacity to consent, who don't understand the consequences fully of their decision because they're in this state of depression and mental illness, they don't have the capacity. They're going to be given that capacity if if the law is not changed, if that expansion is not halted. So Bill C-218 by Tamara Jansen is, every Liberal needs to say halt. Mark Carney should say to his Liberal caucus, hey, this has gone far enough. We need to be a little bit sensible here. We need to listen to the people. The Canadian public doesn't want this, doesn't want us killing off depressed persons. Let's support Bill C-218. And we saw from, I think it was a Globe and Mail article that there was some inside report that the Liberals are considering even their own bill, perhaps, to prevent the expansion of euthanasia to mentally ill and depressed persons.
There's not a single MP on the Hill this week. As you know, it's recess. Does that change anything in the messaging and the outreach to member of parliaments, even senators?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll let Josie, my colleague, answer.
No, we know that Parliament is well aware of the National March for Life, so our message to them is the same. We want to see the abolition of euthanasia and abortion, and as indicated by the question previous, there might not presently be an appetite for complete abolition, but both the pro-life MPs have been invited to these events, and also the pro-abortion and pro-euthanasia MPs were the boogeyman under the bed for them. They know that we're here, and they like to talk about us.
Of confidence in regard to the expansion, do you believe that the Prime Minister and the government will just halt it? Are you confident in that matter, that the next year's deadline, it's going to get pushed by the government?
I would be very surprised if euthanasia is expanded to those suffering solely from mental illness. There are people on all sides of the aisle that realize this is a terrible idea, that this would be catastrophic, and it would have a horrific ripple effect. We know what effect suicide has in communities currently, and so if that increases, people are going to be traumatized, and this is going to create a great wound in our culture. And I think that experts have been warning that this shouldn't be expanded, and even those who might support it in theory would say we're just not ready right now. So I think that one way or another, the expansion is going to be halted, but we're not going to take that for granted.
If I can add to that and just say that I think the timing of Premier Danielle Smith in Alberta, her Bill 18, which basically made Track 2 euthanasia illegal, the timing was perfect, because that really sent a very strong message to the Liberal government. I think there was even some acknowledgement in that news article where the government made that the provinces may have an issue with it. And so I think perhaps they're seeing the writing on the wall, that they can't go ahead as much as they want to murder more Canadians who have depression and anxiety and autism. They're not going to be able to, that there's going to be backlash. And part of our job is to grow that backlash, and we're doing that. We're educating more Canadians about the fact that they're vulnerable family members and friends and neighbors are going to be poisoned to death. They're going to be permitted just because they're lonely, just because they're depressed or suffering with some kind of psychological problem, that they're going to be allowed to be killed. And so that pressure is going to build, and hopefully the government will stand down.
Sure. I have my other question was not necessarily just on the service of MAID itself, but there's a bill introduced by Garda Genius in February titled C-260, the Care Not Coercion Act. It refers to the blocking, essentially, of bureaucrats and non-medical professionals from recommending MAID as an option to patients. If anyone's willing to speak more on what they've reviewed in terms of cases
this
where...
This last question is going to be answered by my pro-life Canadian friends, but I would like to give a few remarks on you. Regarding the polls, we won the referendum against the polls. All the polls showed 70-30. And even the last day before the referendum, the polls showed 70-30, and then we won 53. Let's say we don't believe any polls anymore, okay? Because the polls is not the measuring public opinion, but creating it. So we are, of course, fighting for truth, fighting for lives, and we are also fighting against the polls. But the basic the basic fight is fight not for votes of MPs and governments, because governments are coming and going. We are fighting and we are working for changing people's hearts and minds. And this is the main issue of every March for Life. It is not important, very much important, how many MPs or government officials are there. Important is that we are changing hearts and minds of the people, ordinary people, because ordinary people will remove bad, sick governments who impose poisoning of the people. So I really want to invite people to come, families, children, youngsters, to come to March for Life and to do the best thing they can do tomorrow at 12 on Capitol Hill. Thank you.
I'll ask you one more question now, if you don't mind. You'd probably describe Slovenia as, or generally Eastern Europe as a more conservative-leaning region than perhaps Canada. You might disagree with that, but Slovenia, on the record, was indeed the first post-communist country to legalize same-sex marriage. So there is an exception to Slovenia being more progressive in the recent history. How would you describe Slovenian society as contrast to Canadian society, which is internationally recognized as one of the more progressive societies in the world?
I think that Slovenia is one of the most liberal countries in Europe, and I think the main argument for our people is that they are on the side of nature and science. And nature and science are all against poisoning people. We have all doctor organizations on our side. They said, poisoning people is not our work. Our work is to heal people, to help them not to suffer, not to feel pain, but not to kill. And I think that every man, every woman in this world feels that poisoning man or woman, who is sick and elderly, is not the right thing. Is not the right thing. And I think that we succeed to explain to our fellow citizens that this is the real question. This is the real question, to do the right thing at the hard time. So I thank to our fellow citizens, and I'm sure that this message is going to prevail also in Western civilization, because I saw the demographic figures of Canada. I mean, it's terrible. 1.26. I mean, these demographic figures are terrible, and including your, very, 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 very big immigration. And if you don't make some very, very structural things for in the very near future, I think also Canada is going to have a big demographic problem. So I think that the decision for life is always the right decision, and decision for poisoning is always the wrong decision. And I think that not MPs and governments are those who must first to understand it, but this must be understood by common people. And March for Life is the right opportunity to present these truths to ordinary people.
Last question here for me. You talked about Alberta. I was wondering if you had any conversations with provinces that make you believe that they are willing to go the way Alberta has gone. If so, which ones?
Well, we haven't had any conversations. We do plan. We are planning some campaigns to pressure. I think, first of all, conservative-led provincial governments in Ontario and Saskatchewan to basically copy Alberta's bill and put in those protections for residents of their province as well. But
no conversation as of today.
No conversation as of today. But it's something, of course, that Premier Doug Ford should pay attention to. Where strong leaders are leading with common sense, why not copy what they're doing? Danielle Smith is protecting Albertans from being poisoned to death, from being killed by lethal injection, and he should do the same. And it's within his purview. As I stated earlier, provinces have the sole power to regulate, license, and deem whether a procedure is medically necessary for purposes of funding. So Doug Ford, the Ontario government, or in Saskatchewan, or any other provincial government could say, we believe that poisoning patients to death is not health care, it's not treating an illness or injury, and therefore we will not fund it anymore. And the cases of euthanasia would dry up pretty quick. So we think that that should happen.
Thank
And if I could answer your question, I'm sorry, no one answered your question about Garnet Genes's Bill C-260. Yeah, so we applaud MP Genes's initiative to try to prevent coercion, and obviously coercion is happening. We've seen it with Christine Gauthier, the veteran who asked for a wheelchair with the Veteran Affairs Office, or a wheelchair ramp, and she was, they tried to talk her into assisted suicide instead because the wheelchair ramp was more expensive. We've seen, other veterans. So we applaud him for addressing the concerns that are very real, that Canadians are being coerced into euthanasia instead of treatment. We do wish it went farther. Because it doesn't prevent nurses and doctors from initiating those conversations. And again, that's an area where the Alberta government is leading. So they've banned healthcare workers from initiating conversations about euthanasia with their patients, which is steering them into death.
Thank you. This concludes the press conference. Merci, c'est ce qui met fin à cette conférence de presse.
Thank you, everyone, for attending. Tomorrow will be our National March for Life. We invite you to come and cover that as well. And we start rallying on the Hill at noon, and hope to see you there.